Ulanoff here with us. I think you're in for an amazing conversation. A few general things. We do have a restroom if you need to use it. It's in the back here. There's only one other door back there, so if you need that, help yourself to refreshments. The bookshop does close at 7. We will not kick anyone out or accuse anyone of any crimes here, but we will, just encourage. We all want to get home to have some dinner as well. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Please buy a copy of BitFlip and get it signed on your way out. And without further ado, Mike Trigg, Lawrence Glassberg, and Lance Ulanoff. Enjoy.
By the way, quick administrative note: sit down, please. This is probably the sixth or seventh event I've done, and nobody likes to sit in the front row. So
we're not going to call on you.
I might call on the people in the back.
And if you need to leave, you can still sit in the front. So thank you, Ryan. Thanks. I know I did sort of knock on the door a couple months back and say, hey, I shop here and I have a book that I want you to not only sell, but I'd love to help host an event here. And how delightful to know the author for more than, well, it's not delightful that I've known you for more than 30 years, but I've known you a really long time.
Back since we were 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, if only, celebrating our something reunion, and it's not 20. Mike, if you don't know, for folks who don't know me, I'm Lauren, and Mike is married to my best friend. So I have heard about the idea behind BitFlip for quite some time, and it's remarkable that, it's incredible when you decide that you're going to write a book to actually finish the book and then to publish a book. So kudos to you, Mike. And I loved reading it, and I don't say that because I'm your friend. I really did love reading it. And then we had this idea to ask Lance to join in the conversation. Lance is a commentator and a tech expert. He is editor-in-chief of TechRadar, but he's also been with Mashable and PC Mag and PC Magazine. And anyway, he's my go-to person when it comes to reporting on anything tech. I'm a Luddite, he's the opposite, and he's also the expert who's always on Kelly and Ryan, also on WABC-TV. So Lance, thank you, and it's so nice to see you in person.
Yes, I know, it's very nice to be here in person.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm really impressed with you, Mike, because I have been a writer my whole life and I've never written a book. I just think that the fact that you finished this, I don't even care if it was nothing but, garbage. It's still a quality. It's not.
The secret is after page 50, it gets very
It's an excellent book. You stuck with it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's remarkable to make the transition from one industry to the next. You had this inkling for years, Mike, that you wanted to be a writer. So why did you decide after years in the Silicon Valley tech world, did you make the move?
Yeah, well, as you say, back to our Northwestern days, I remember taking a creative writing class there, and I was like, writing would be really cool. Like, I really enjoyed it, but I felt like there's no way I could make a living doing this. So I did a bunch of writing adjacent things. I got into public relations and marketing and stuff along the way. And then this thing called the Information Superhighway came along back in mid-90s, early 90s. We were living in DC at the time, and I thought, that seems pretty, like this is gonna be a pretty big deal. So we moved out to Silicon Valley, and a 25-year career in tech kind of got in the way of that writing aspiration. But it really was, in some respects, I was kind of trying to write this book nights and weekends. That was hard to do. It was hard to make progress on it. And COVID ended up being kind of a silver lining for me, because I was working on a startup at the time, didn't make it through COVID. We ended up shutting it down. And I thought, if I'm ever going to take the plunge and commit to writing full time, now is it. So the universe was kind of talking to me, and I did it, and finally now have it published.
And here you are. And just tell us what BitFlip means. Me who don't speak computer.
Yeah, don't speak in binary code. So in binary code, which is sort of the most basic software code, every bit can either be expressed as 0 or 1. And when it changes, that's called a bit flip. And here I'm using it sort of metaphorically to refer to a change of heart, so a kind of 180-degree switch. And I think I came up with the title before I wrote a single page of the book. Thank you. I mean, it was a parallel that I was feeling at the time, obviously, as I was considering a career change. And I thought, that's something interesting. And I think that concept has actually really resonated especially with people in the tech industry, because I think through COVID, there's been a lot of, of that change of heart, of that kind of reassessment, where people are sort of saying, gosh, I thought we were making the world a better place. Maybe we're not anymore. And so you're seeing a fair amount of fallout of that.
And I know, Lance, you probably cover a fair bit of that fallout. So what have you seen in the years and you've really been covering the industry for as long as Mike has been in it?
Yeah. I mean, from the early '90s on, and it's weird because people think that this phenomenon of these startups and these tech bros and people like Travis Kalanick and Andrew or Adam Newman, folks who create these startups with all this excitement and then they blow up in their faces, that's a new thing, but it really isn't, because you said something to me when you're outside about the burn rate, and we started talking about burn rate of companies back in the 90s. So it's oftentimes been associated with both tech company and media companies, especially tech companies now. I've sat in front of some of the big guys. I sat and listened to Travis. I've interviewed Elon Musk, and you see these people who are initially seen as heroes, almost gods, and then you watch them like sort of implode, partially because they were always these other people. The stories we tell ourselves about these people is what drives the narrative, but it's not the reality of who they are, which is why I really like this book, because I saw all the parallels in it.
Well, you touched on a really important point. That was a big motivator for me to write the book. A lot of what I read about the tech industry in the media and in nonfiction, as I summarize, either glorifies or vilifies the tech industry and the people in it, right? It's either, many times for the same people, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, like they're glorified and then they're torn down. And having worked in the industry, I sort of felt like it's not that simple. It's much more nuanced. And I wanted to kind of tell that story where it's not that the characters in this are evil per se, you just they have ulterior motives and those things get in the way, and those complexities within a startup company can and often do unfortunately lead to a bad place. So.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say that these are average people who do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And so you look at a Mark Zuckerberg and you look at Travis and you look at Elizabeth Holmes, and when they get into these businesses, when they start these industries or have these great ideas, it tends to amplify some part of them and not always the best part of them. And so that's what I keep going back to Elon because I think that's exactly what's happened to him. I met him like a decade ago, and he's not the same person now that he was then, but there were parts of that there. But I think that's sort of, again, that's why the book resonated with me, because I could see within it and the characters that whatever kernel they had in their personalities was sort of fertilized and grown for better.
Metastasized almost.
Right,
Yeah,
better
exactly.
or worse.
Yeah.
We could set the stage for folks, the book's just out, so you don't know the story necessarily, but Sam Hughes is the protagonist, and he's this sort of affable Midwestern guy who comes seeking to make the world a better place in Silicon Valley. I mean, it's a little autobiographical.
My original name for Sam was Mark. I gotta make it a little bit more different.
For comfort. So the characters, they're not. I'm sure they're reflective of people you've worked with, little bits and pieces. But a lot of them have this tech hubris, which you guys have just sort of spoken about, that something happens and they grow into, it's almost like a rock star mentality. You're too big for your britches.
You see it all over the place in Silicon Valley. You see it in any environment like that. Hollywood's like this, Wall Street's like this, any environment where ego and just audacity is really rewarded, people mimic those behaviors. And so that was kind of, this is the part where I give my wife Leslie a shout out. That, I would share those stories. I'd get home and I'd be like, oh my God, you won't believe what the meeting I had today. And she would say, that's really funny, like you should write a book. Like these are fun little anecdotes. And so I, kind of started to capture some of those, just little bits and pieces. There's nobody I know who is like explicitly a character in the book. It's not a thinly veiled memoir by any means. But, those behaviors, many of the incidents and situations and comments are things I
Are
witnessed.
the real deal.
Yeah.
Without giving anything away, I'm really glad it's not a memoir.
Well, as I said, a memoir of my professional life would be boring, so I had to put a little fiction.
So I do want Mike to read one or two excerpts, and this one is a little bit about the tech hubris. Early on in the book, Sam, the main character, is considering toying with the idea of leaving the tech industry, and he's speaking with a guy named Peter who's done quite well.
Yes.
So why don't you read, I think, from Modern Life on.
Okay.
I just feel like I'm at the Passover Seder. Can you just read this portion?
Sorry. Exactly. So I need my readers for this. So this is a scene where, so just as a touch more context, the hero's journey sort of story template is something I copied a little bit for this. And if you're familiar with that, there's kind of this concept of the mentor, who is, Yoda in Star Wars is the mentor in that template. And Peter, I described as the anti-mentor. He's the multi-billionaire, Midas touch kind of guy who kind of nudges Sam towards his more base instincts. So, and yes, you're right. So to cue this up, this is in Peter's voice. Sam has just confessed, he's like, I don't know if I'm going to stay in the tech industry. I might try something new. So Peter says, modern life as we know it wouldn't exist without Silicon Valley. Technology isn't just a sector or an industry, it is the entire economy. Sure, people may think they work in financial services or healthcare or manufacturing or retail, but tech is absorbing all those legacy industries. The financial services industry doesn't matter anymore. No one trades stocks in pits on Wall Street. It's all done algorithmically on computers in nanoseconds. The retail industry doesn't matter anymore. Physical big box stores are closing because we buy everything now on apps and e-commerce sites. The entertainment industry doesn't matter anymore. No one shoots movies or records albums in studios. It's all done on laptops. The hospitality industry doesn't matter anymore. It's being replaced with Airbnb and on down the line. There is no industry that hasn't been completely obsoleted by technology. We're in the third phase of the technology revolution. The first was transformation, making legacy industries more efficient at delivering the same goods and services. The second was disruption, where legacy industries were forced to revisit their fundamental business models in light of new technologies. Now we're in the final phase, replacement. At the end of the day, it's hard to cannibalize yourself. The legacy incumbents just cannot change fast enough to accommodate these technological sea changes, and they're being driven out of business by digital native companies that are replacing them. So this sentiment was mimicked a little bit, you'll probably know this reference, by a blog post that Mark Andreessen wrote. Mark Andreessen, of course, founded Netscape. He's arguably one of the inventors of the internet, went on to form one of the most influential venture capital firms in the world, and he wrote a post called, I think it's Software is Eating Everything or something like that, and that is the express sentiment in that nothing else matters. That is their strategy. And to a large extent, that's been proven to be true. I mean, that is happening.
And you see it.
Oh yeah, I mean, there is a technical solution to virtually everything. You can apply technology to every sector. I've seen, where I started, I remember talking to corporations that didn't believe that the transformation was coming.
Right.
And they couldn't imagine, it was the whispers of the internet, and they couldn't imagine how they could conduct business digitally through something that would be, just ones and zeros. Like they wanted checks and balances in between. They didn't want the order to go from the client to the floor, to the inventory floor. They literally built stuff in between because they were afraid of it. And every time that an industry slows down or says, no, we can't do this, or fights, it usually loses. I'll give you one little anecdote. When Travis Kalanick was in California talking, and this was kind of at both his height and also at the moment where people were going, what's up with this guy? He talked about the New York City taxi industry. And it was kind of writ large because it was really talking about all taxi industries and how Uber was destroying them. Uber's a really good business, it's a fundamentally sound business, but it also was meeting an old school industry. And what was happening is the old school industry was trying to fight back. Now he said, F the New York City Taxi Commission, that was what he said. But they didn't have an answer at that time. It took them years, and there was some regulatory stuff that went on, and also because he was a bull in a china shop that kind of met in the middle. But for a while, it was just Ubers riding around here and taxi drivers going, what the hell? Because they didn't have an app, they didn't have anything. You know,
Well,
the whole
and taxi
system.
drivers were committing suicide because they
They
couldn't
paid the
cover
medallions
their
and-
medallion
yeah.
fares.
Right,
Yeah.
so you never want to say no to technology. You want to say how, and then you want to discuss the way to do it.
I think you're touching on something that to me is deeply, deeply ingrained in the DNA of Silicon Valley and the tech industry overall, which is disruption. That, you know, kind of its origins were counterculture. You think of original Apple, like we're challenging Big Blue, et cetera. And that mindset of disruption has kind of morphed into, you know, law breaking, law bending, you know, like just kind of a ethos that it's okay that we're violating New York City law because it's for this kind of greater good. And that's where it really
Well,
can
and the
become
consumer wants
perverse.
it.
Exactly.
The ends justify the means,
Yeah.
right? They say, we're going to get here anyway, so who cares what happens
If we break
in
stuff,
between?
exactly.
Right, and that's really, I mean, when you look at the leaders of these companies, that is how they think. You know, Mark Zuckerberg talks about the metaverse. That's where we're all going.
Move fast and break things.
Right,
That was
which he
another.
tries, they don't say it anymore
Yeah.
because he got in trouble for that. But the reality is he's breaking the world with this metaverse. He's breaking many, many industries right now in his effort to say we're all going to live virtually in some fashion. And there's some truth
Sounds like
in
a
that.
blast.
So Mike, in BitFlip, a number of characters are, as I think you say, skirting the hairy edge of fraud.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
And it's not just, you know, the protagonist sort of gets caught up with the idea of could he do that and should he do that? How much did you see of that?
Oh, you see it all the time. I mean, there's a phrase widely used in Silicon Valley of "fake it till you make it," kind of this mindset of like, you know, when you go and pitch a venture capital firm, you don't tell them your current story. You tell them the glorious, you know, future version of what you're going to be. And so that spin, exaggeration, whatever you want to call it, just sometimes gets blown way out of control and can tip into criminal behavior. I mean, Theranos is obviously a devastating example of it. You know, if you haven't read John Carreyrou's book, Bad Blood, and Netflix series, that's a wonderful, wonderful story. And, you know, it's tragic for the people who are at the company, but I think it really epitomizes, you know, the series of kind of like, okay, this is our story, this is our reality, how do we make those things bridge, exaggerate, you know, in their case, you know, blatant fraud, obviously, but I've seen many companies, I've been at many companies, I've been head of marketing in a lot of these things, so my job was to tell the big story and spin
But
the-
did you ever, were you ever in a position where you said, you can't do that, or you
Well,
are crossing
it
the
gets,
line?
so the company portrayed in BitFlip, iNetu, is still a private venture-backed company. When you're private, you know, it's like there's a moment in the book where Sam is like, who would I report this fraud to?
Right,
Like,
would
who
he
even
call the
gives a
local
shit?
police,
Exactly.
the FBI? Right.
Exactly. So when you're that early stage, and by the way, your board is comprised of venture investors who have it in every bit of their interest for the company to, you know, exit and be successful and everything else. Quite a bit of, not really there to provide the fiduciary responsibility so much. That's when things get problematic. And I think if you, now as companies become a public company, there's of course SEC and a bunch of regulatory issues that they have to comply with, where there's a super, super gray area. You know, this term unicorn was originally coined for a private company that's over $1 billion valuation. There used to be like 2 of those, and that's why they were so rare. They were called unicorns. There's like 1,500 unicorn companies right now.
That's what we were bonded, man.
Exactly. And so I think that to me is where you look at that and you go, okay, those companies are big enough to matter. They're not a 5-person startup. And if they are skirting, bending, not reporting, that's a real problem.
Well, it's to me, so it's something from the book and it's something from these companies. There's the moment of truth where you do something that you know is going to turn the wrong way or is going to hurt people. You know, with Theranos, it was when they started using the Siemens machines
Yes.
to run the test instead of their own
legend
machine.
test, right.
But, you know, whether you're a private or public company, yes, you're dealing with investors, both private investors, you start dealing with the public investors and their money. But what people seem to get lost in, and I think what happens to these characters getting lost here, is that they forget that there are human beings who are going to be impacted by the decisions you make. With Theranos, there are people who potentially could die because these tests weren't telling the right things. And I think even a company that's operating like this, at some point, I mean, there's some tragedy in this book, and the human element is what gets lost because everybody's thinking about the profit, the hubris, the pride, the potential of 1 billion, being a unicorn, all of the things, the things that he was going for.
Another thing that I portrayed in the book that I've seen in real life is, your decisions aren't always super clear cut. There's a moment where Sam kind of is like, well, if I blow the whistle on this fraud, I'm gonna have to lay off 200 employees, and so you realize okay, it's not all good things on one side of the ledger and all bad things on the other side of the ledger. And that I think is important to understand too, because those things are part of the decision-making process. They're also part of the way people rationalize the decisions or justify the decisions that they're making. So it's complicated.
Also, he wants to make money. So if he
Correct.
called fraud and the character has a hefty investment or he has an upside to gain if the company does well. So that's a fine line to walk. When you're interviewing folks at the startup level, Lance, do you ever get the sense that story is too good? Believe.
It's interesting. You have a conversation with somebody who's doing a startup, and they're always the same because they have so much passion. Passion for sometimes the most idiosyncratic things, because they've come up with a solution to make that cup levitate 2 centimeters off the ground. That's it. That's the thing. But that is amazing. Talk you through it, and you get excited. If you have any empathy, you start to sort of pick up on that, and then you're kind of into it, and then you want to write about it. But when I'm having those conversations, I'm always trying to make sure that foundationally it's sound. Like, I want them to explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because there's always the idea you can do anything, you can say you can do anything, but the reality of doing stuff is so different. And most startups fail because they have these brilliant ideas and they have the passion and maybe they have the charisma, but it just doesn't work. There's a whole other world of when it even if it doesn't work and they still keep going, but in the real world, most people don't. And I feel badly. I mean, I remember just one woman who created this really cool robot, and I had known her for years, and I was excited about it. And I went and I interviewed her, she showed it to me, it's great, but she was having a problem with scale, and I could see it even then. And I really didn't say that to her at the moment. I just wrote a clear-headed story about it. I even took it on television because I thought this is cool, innovative technology. I wasn't trying to help her, I was trying to show people what's possible. She failed. The thing is gone, just vaporized because you just couldn't scale up. So sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, there's this another scene in the book that I imagine you could relate to, given how often you get pitched new ideas, where Sam's at a conference and all these eager entrepreneurs are so excited about telling him about their marijuana startup and their virtual reality thing and whatnot, and a lot of them are solutions looking for a problem. So
Lots of crypto stuff, lots of crypto and NFT stuff. That's like every single day.
So, but does the tech industry actually need to only do good? Like, why the mission? Why did you feel like, oh, I've got to join the tech industry because it is going to change the world? Does every industry need to be a good industry?
I think that was really central to the value proposition of joining the tech industry, at least when I, in the .com phase of things. I remember feeling like, okay, this is an opportunity to both make the world a better place and make a ton of money. Like, we're not the bad guys like those Wall Street people and whatnot. We're gonna be good for humanity. There's no negative consequences at all to technology.
Right? Well, that's it, right? Unintended consequences.
That was the mindset.
I believe that most people getting into the industry, and most people I've talked to over the last 30 or so years, are seeing a better way to do things. To think differently, to improve stuff. But sometimes things are so successful that they kind of run rampant, right? We had no idea what social media was going to do to people.
Yeah.
No idea how Instagram would affect young women. Not even a clue.
Right.
And these things.
Well, let's go back to Facebook. I mean, Facebook affected people, and we've kind of ignored that and plowed right through.
Yeah,
I mean, the whole proposition of what Facebook was.
But they're rebranded.
It's meta now.
Right.
It's meta.
It's fine.
You have a, Mike, I didn't discuss this with you before, but
I'll take it on the fly.
I mean, you wrote it, so you'd probably be able to read it. There
Don't assume.
there is a discussion where Sam is talking to an attorney. I think they're in Sonoma or Napa at this point. About tech being going from transformative to evil. So
Is this a don't be evil?
yeah, don't be evil. So
I need my readers again.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
that's where the don't be evil.
Yeah. All right. So, so this is a scene where they're wine tasting in Sonoma with another couple, and the other couple happens to the other
As
husband
couples
happens to
from
be-
Silicon Valley do.
as we do,
You
as
know,
we
that's
want to
what
do,
they do.
exactly. So Todd, the friend, says, "Remember the Google mission statement: don't be evil." This is him telling him, you can't go back and go along with fraud. So Sam says, "Don't be evil," Sam echoed incredulously. "That's such bullshit. Do you really think that that's the credo of big tech anymore? As an industry, we've just kept moving the goalposts of what constitutes evil. Developers obsess about how to make their apps more addictive to users. Websites force visitors to sign up for newsletters and spam them incessantly. Online services make it practically impossible for people to cancel their subscriptions. Advertisers siphon personal data and compromise our privacy. Data aggregators scrape personal data about us from social media websites. And hackers exploit this entire treasure trove of information to perpetrate fraud, from identity theft to fake news. I think most people would call that stuff evil. But as an industry, we present them as best practices. We just keep weaving a more and more elaborate lie, pretending we're not facilitators, enablers to forces that are corrupting our society. And meanwhile, those are the companies that are having multi-billion-dollar IPOs. Every day, there's just more and more proof. You need to be evil to win. And I'm tired of losing. So Sam's getting his, he's going to the dark side.
Sam.
Yeah.
All right, so Mike, will you ever go back into the tech industry? Having read that.
I love the tech industry, and I love the Bay Area. Even though this is a critique of that industry in that area, as a Wisconsin kid, when I first moved out there, and I did what Sam does, I drove a U-Haul across the Altamont Pass, and I was like, holy shit, I don't think I'm ever gonna leave here. Like, this is a magical place. It's also a place that constantly reinvents itself, and so I think it's really interesting how this dialogue is one that people in Silicon Valley are very much engaging with, because they want to be the good guys. It's largely comprised of progressive, well-intentioned people, and so I wouldn't have chosen any other industry. I wouldn't rule out continuing in the tech industry, but that said, I'm really having a lot of fun being an author, and I've written another book already. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'm at least going to do a second book.
All right, I'll ask you about that after I ask Lance. When you read that portion, which is really not, it's not far off the mark. It's maybe a little bit exaggerated.
Not much.
So
Not much.
what needs to be done, or what can be done? in
Well,
terms of the industry?
I've stood right next to Jeff Bezos and asked him what's okay to do. And he said,
He's like, limits?
Well, no, I was surprised, because we talked about regulation. He was like, yeah, the industry needs to be regulated. Like, he believes that, of course, he's no longer running Amazon, so he's off running around looking just like me, but with billions of dollars. But he's, he believes, and actually Mark Zuckerberg will say something similar. The reason they say they believe that regulation needs to happen, because the opposite of fighting it is that it only gets worse, and then there's more hearings and stuff, and they don't want that. And when they say, yeah, we're cool with regulation, there's fewer of them. But the reality is, there is a middle ground here. Systems need data to work. You get a better experience by giving some portion of your data. Transparency helps. There hasn't been a lot of transparency. We've never been in this situation where so many systems can grab so much data about us.
Yeah.
There's so many things that are new to us. that we're learning along the way. So mistakes are being made, have been made. Not all of them were made for the sake of evil. Google was not built to be evil. Google was built to be a knowledge base. It's just that they built it so efficiently that it knows everything about every single one of us. And it's, at some point it will be Skynet. So sorry. So but I'm a big believer, like you. I've been in the tech media industry for a very long time. I love it. I believe in it. I think that there is potential for good. I think Apple's an interesting case where it's the biggest, most powerful, richest company in the world, but they are trying to do some things different. When they were having the brownouts during the 109-degree weather that was there when I was there, they're running on solar. They don't care. They're fine. They're not trying to just suck the power. They built a self-sufficient area. So technology is not going away. We need to learn to live with it. We need to learn to make sure it's working for us, not against us. And books like this, I think, just sort of illuminate that. They kind of put it on paper, and you go, "Oh, right, that is what's happening."
Right.
It was really helpful to read it, I thought.
So what's your next book?
My next book, so there's a teaser on my website, MikeTrigg.com, in case you want to sign up. The working title, subject to change by my publisher, is called Burner, as in a burner phone, but it is also the online handle for an anonymous upstart guy who's created sort of a populist movement, think sort of like QAnon type of thing. Nobody knows he's behind it. And he happens to fall in love with an Instagram celebrity who's the daughter of a tech billionaire. So I wanted a bit of a love story and thriller of kind of polar opposites in terms of socioeconomic class, political view, etc. But each people who value and base a large part of their self-esteem on their online following. And how does that contort and create unintended consequences? So that's the book.
Is there space for like a middle-aged media?
No. I'm going to do 20-somethings.
And is it a thriller? Will we be having another
Yes,
book
it
event?
is more thriller. And in fact, in the opening scene, Shane, who's the male protagonist, has just been arrested for treason. And Chloe, the female protagonist, has just been abducted by Shane's followers. So this is a movement a la the January 6th riots that has just spun out of his control to manage it anymore. And obviously he didn't intend for his girlfriend to be abducted by his followers. So yeah, it's definitely a little bit more a thriller. It was fun to write from an author's perspective and a challenge for me. As you mentioned, this book was a little autobiographical, so I could envision the scenes that Sam was going through. This next book, I'm writing first-person narrative from dueling narrative, alternating between those 2 points of view. So that's the first time I've written first-person female narrative, right? and it was great. It was challenging and a lot of fun.
Well, your creative writing professor would
Yes.
be proud of you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike or Lance?
I think I can officially say this is standing room only, right?
No, we've got 3 seats here.
But there's more bodies than seats could
Thank
be
you,
filled.
friends.
So.
Thank you, friends of
Yes.
friends.
Come on, first question's always the hardest. Someone's
Come
got to
on,
break the seal.
I know you haven't read it, but how much of Leslie is in Heather?
Oh wow, that is a question I have not gotten, but I should have expected from you. I think Heather. I don't know how
She
to
does
answer
some biting
that.
comebacks.
Yes.
She definitely. Heather does, and you're good at that too.
I don't.
Move on.
I'm going to give an honest and hopefully sincere answer. Leslie is obviously my best friend, my spouse, and someone who is sort of my moral compass. I can share things with her. She's a great person to feedback. She's my first beta reader on the first book and on the second book, and she'll give it to me straight. And that is probably the quality of Leslie's that's most captured in Heather. Heather is his barometer for what's right and what's wrong. I mean, and you see her kind of go, "What the hell are you doing?" Up until an argument they have sort of late in the book where she kind of can't, she starts out saying after Sam is fired in the opening, like, you should fight back and get your job back, and we're a dual income couple in Silicon Valley, like we can't afford to live here without your salary. But he kind of takes a lot of what she says and contorts it into a totally different direction, and then she becomes the counterbalance on the other side where she's like, Sam, I don't even know you anymore.
Yeah.
Like I don't even recognize the behavior that you're exhibiting here. So that's probably the moral compass.
I have a question for Lance. You may have just answered it at the beginning, but you talked about how much Elon Musk had changed from the first time you interviewed him to at some point in the future. The question I had is, of all the people that you've interviewed, who do you think, in your view, did undergo the greatest transformation for whatever the reasons were over time as you examined that person over the years?
I mean, that's hard because I certainly Elon Musk is somebody who I ended up really tracking closely, and you know he seemed sweet and smart, and literally talked him into whistling "Fly Me to the Moon." Because I could see he had a lot of different skills. He was already running 3 companies, and I'm like, is there anything that, you know, do you have any other talents? I said. He said, I can whistle. I said, so, and of course he whistled that because he wants to go to the moon. He happened to be a person who was interested in all the things I'm interested in, but this sort of antagonistic approach that he takes on Twitter and in board meetings, I don't really understand it. But he has social issues that are actually quite real. He recently talked about them, you know, that he's, I was gonna say, it's not ADHD. Asperger's, yeah, he's Asperger's. And I believe that's true because one of the things you can't do is read other people's emotions. And so it's one of the reasons he acts that way. But then you've seen someone like Bill Gates, you know, where he was kind of the enfant terrible in the 90s. And then, you know, we're talking to him in 2005 or whatever, and he's kind of getting to be this older guy who's really
statesman kind of
guy, a guy who's no longer going to jump over a chair, you know, and even Steve Jobs, you know, the hagiography that surrounds him now, and to understand who he really was back, you know, when he started the company, but in the 90s and even, you know, the early 2000s. People are more complex. That's all I can say, is that they're more complex. People transform as they age, as they do more things, and they go one way or the other, I guess.
I think you touched on this earlier, the hype, like the believing your own hype is a very real syndrome. I mean, I feel like Elon Musk, talk about, I mean, can I please never read another story about Elon Musk? Like, you know, these guys just get suck so much wind out, or air out of the room or whatever. They just command so much attention, and I think they really just start to believe they really are that great for a while.
I will say that, you know, whatever you believe about what Elon has accomplished on his own, his companies have tangible things. You know, we have Teslas that are everywhere. We are back to sending people into space, and mostly in his rockets. We have thousands of satellites right now floating around us that are going to deliver high-speed internet from the satellites to phones, and that's largely because of him. Now, how much he is personally responsible for any of those things, it's a little hard for me to know. I know he taught himself rocket science, but it is this idea of people forgetting that people are human and lifting them up to a level where no one can actually, you can't live up to that. There's a moment that I saw with Elon Musk, and I'll shut up, where we were at a press conference. It was announced the Model 3, and he came into the room really distracted. He was on his phone, came in, sat down, seemed to rush the whole thing. Like he was impatient, he was picking up, it was very weird, and then he left. It turned out that he was having this little tete-a-tete with Amber Heard. And he was going back and forth with her. Like his relationship with this woman was breaking up, and because he can't separate and he can't manage his emotions, he literally carried it out in front of us. And you know, that's who he is. You know, for better or worse, that's who he is.
Huh. Well, that's a nice little tidbit there. Amber, she's always getting in the way of these
She was at one of the launch events because it was on and off again. She was there.
Wow.
Question in the front row.
Stephanie.
I was just wondering, because you're talking about, you talk about the startup companies and sort of that big idea that's not real yet and just like hyping it and having the venture capital. But when you apply that same idea to the media, right? And we talk about all this, this is what technology is going to do. This is what technology is doing. And, a lot of people read the media as fact, right? And so then that becomes sort of what we think is happening, what should be happening, and where's that other nagging voice that pulls us in the other direction away from technology to IRL, you know?
You should answer this, but I want to jump in with a quick modification to that question. People in the media look at what you click on. So there's kind of a narrative like, oh, the media people are feeding us this stuff that we don't want and influencing us. Well, they wrote the 200th article on Elon Musk because that's what everybody reads. They're Mark Zuckerberg, right?
And I can tell you that our story assignments at Channel 7 are based on what we know people are clicking
People watch.
on.
Yeah.
So be a conscious, consumer of media too, because what you read influences what gets published. But you should answer that question, Lance.
It's interesting because we've talked a little bit about Google, and one of the things that Google is doing right now is trying to reorient media away from clickbait, because there is this issue of, and Facebook did it too, but Google has more power, and it can actually sort of demote content based on various metrics. And one of the metrics that they're really looking at now is, what is this story telling you, the headline telling you? Is it real? Is it asking a question that can't be answered? Is it just trying to tease you in? So we're actually really cognizant of that. We try and write stories that are clear and factual. There is the sort of skate to where the puck's going, so write that story. But there's also the idea of, if we don't do our jobs and tell people about the new things that are happening that they don't know about, that are not going to necessarily drive the clicks, we are failing. I love to write those stories. I love to write the hidden stories, the things that people don't know. But it is difficult because at some point, if you only write those kinds of stories, guess what? You have no traffic, you have no revenue, you're out of a job. So you have to find the balance. But there is a way of telling true stories that are interesting that people also want to click on. I think that is the goal. I never write things intentionally that are untrue, ever. I don't believe in that. I'm super old school journalism,
Is that even like a debate? Like,
It is.
if you're a journalist, that's what you're supposed to do.
It's a big debate, but not in my circle. So there is fact out there. There is truth and interesting stories, but people who don't ask that second question of these startups and of these companies about how things are actually working and just get sort of, oh, that's really awesome. They're not doing the job, and they're doing the disservice.
Well, it's like publishing the press release versus really looking into what's
press
underneath
releases,
it.
I would just quickly add, it's not just media. The tech platforms struggle with this as well. So I was at a big social media site back in the day, and you can get pretty depressed about the state of humanity fast if you look at what people click on and share on those platforms. And guess what? The most outrageous stuff, the most, exactly, gets the most clicks.
Yeah.
So, be conscious consumers.
On that note, we've got 10 minutes for Mike to sign all of those copies that you're going to buy.
We can take one or two. What time is it? We got time for one or two.
Are you guys kicking us out at 7?
No, I think as long as we're
All right.
exiting in an orderly fashion. At 7:05, this turns into an escape room. So you better get out by then, because we'll be clawing up the ladders.
All right, any other questions?
Were there any more other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a political nerd, convention reading at TechRadar. So what would you do to make tech more responsible and actually live up to its promise?
This is a great question. So if people in the back couldn't hear, what would you do, kind of like from a regulatory and legislative and legal standpoint? So there are a number of things that I think can and should be done and are probably overdue. One of my big bugaboos is the Communication Decency Act, Section 230.
Yep.
230, is that right? I always get it wrong.
260.
I forget.
I forget too. Doesn't matter.
I think I said 130 the other day,
Yeah.
but everybody knows what it is. You can look it up. It's basically a 1996 law that was to protect these nascent startups from being sued for misinformation and disinformation that's spread on their platforms. And so it's allowed companies like Facebook to kind of go, not our problem. I think that's been a giant loophole. It's allowed those platforms to get used and abused. Another comparison that I draw oftentimes is to the medical and health space. My wife works at a medical device company. They're obviously regulated by the FDA. Why don't we have sort of similar things? Those Facebook files that were revealed that showed the negative impacts on mental health that they were aware of. These are platforms that millions and millions of people use, our children use. the public deserves visibility into that. So I don't think it's too onerous to require kind of the equivalent of clinical trials after a company gets to a certain stage, so that the public knows, what is the impact of this thing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, the thing that only in recent years we started to talk about is mental health, and the mental health impact of social media and technology on people. I think that we just didn't see it, and so because the way we've treated mental health so poorly, as if it's just something you could get over, we haven't prioritized it. So if we prioritize that, and then we say that any technology that can have an impact on any level of mental health needs to sort of meet this level of requirement and scrutiny, that probably would change things. No one thought when Facebook or Twitter or nowadays TikTok started that these are things that could impact people at a fundamental level and change how they think, change brain chemistry. But of course, that's what's happening.
Another quick one I'll throw in is what makes this super hard is there are no international boundaries when it comes to technology, right? So, we can talk about what regulatory things we might want to do in the US, but you mentioned TikTok, a great example. Arguably an arm of the Chinese government that is destroying, some of our biggest tech companies. And so, it's really hard to think about the regulatory landscape when you think about the international scope and scale of these platforms.
Well, that could be your third book.
International espionage. I like it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. I think that was to ping pong off of most of this conversation. Tech world. I'm good on the Sonoma wine drinking.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mike, you're gonna sign.
I'm gonna sign. I'll park here. I've got my blue pen, so grab a book.
There are copies of the book right behind here. Feel free to grab, and then cash out is just as